الآن موعدنا مع مجلس أقدر وجلسة بعنوان المواطنة الإيجابية العالمية في تعزيز الأخوة الإنسانية. اسمحوا لي بأن أدعو إلى المنصة المتحدث لهذه الجلسة سعادة المطران الدكتور بول هيندر، النائب الرسولي لجنوب شبه الجزيرة العربية الإمارات وعمان واليمن، والمدير الرسولي لشمال الجزيرة العربية الكويت والبحرين وقطر والمملكة العربية السعودية. فليتفضل سعادته مشكورا.
Dear friends, good afternoon. I don't speak Arabic, so you have to listen in English. I've been asked today to speak on the theme Promotion on Human Fraternity in a Multinational Society. Expo 2020, which has brought the nations of the world together in Dubai, has taken as its theme Connecting Minds, Connecting the Future. The sub-themes of sustainability, mobility, and opportunity are, in a certain sense, the keywords which define the future and outlook of global business. Positive global citizenship, empowerment of sustainable investment opportunities is the theme of this year's Aqdar World Summit. Going beyond short-term goals and associated gains, corporates and governments are now aware of the imperative to transact in a more sustainable manner with an awareness of their responsibility to be good corporate citizens within the communities in whose lives they are active participants. Businesses of the 21st century are called to meet new opportunities and challenges with a view to building societies and healthy communities, and consequently economies which will afford a dignified standard of living for the individuals who are a part of the systems of income generations. I like to go back to the theme of Expo 2020, Connecting Minds, Connecting the Future. How can we facilitate connection of human minds which may have traveled along pathways for generations in certain mindsets and frames? How can we enable connections of the good things of the past with the present and with the future? We are all aware of the demands of sustainability. Take care of the present without compromising the future of the coming generations. This leads us to the fundamental question: what kind of world do we want to leave for future generations? Without any doubt, we all dream of a world which holds out rich hopes for the coming generations. We know that this is not possible solely by applying the brakes on climate change or carbon emissions, but also on the growth and spread of the seeds of hatred, violence, intolerance, and most importantly, the risk of the deadliest scourge of all, war. We tremble when we think of the consequences of violence and war. There are no winners or losers in a modern warfare. The victims of modern conflict are very often innocent civilians with the weakest of our society who are the most tragically affected. These are also the ones who very often have to struggle for several generations or maybe even centuries with the bitter after effects of war. Upon the invitation of the President of the United Arab Emirates, His Highness Sheikh Khalifa bin Sultan Al Nahyan, on the 4th of February 2019, in the presence of His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum, the Vice President of the UAE and the ruler of Dubai, His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed, the Crown Prince of Abu Dhabi, Pope Francis, head of the Catholic Church, and His Eminence Ahmed Al-Tayeb, the Grand Imam of Al-Azhar, signed the famous document on human fraternity for world peace and living together. The document is a significant milestone in the relationships between Christians and Muslims all over the world and opens new pathways which call for a renewed commitment in 12 specific areas. These are peace, freedom, justice, dialogue with a view to accepting others, dialogue among believers to promote moral virtue, protection of places of worship, to work against terrorism in all its forms, to work towards the concept of full citizenship and rejection of the term minorities, fostering good relations between the East and the West, recognizing the right of women to education and employment and to exercise their political rights, protection of the fundamental rights of children to grow up in a family environment, and finally, to protection of the rights of the elderly, the weak, the disabled, and the oppressed. It was not by mere coincidence that the document was signed at the Founders Memorial in Abu Dhabi, at the site dedicated to the memory of the founder and father of the United Arab Emirates, His Highness Sheikh Zayed bin Sultan Al Nahyan, a man who loved peace and promoted peace. Here I would like to quote the words of His Highness Sheikh Zayed. Tolerance is a duty. If God is forgiving and we, human beings, are God's creations, why wouldn't we forgive? We are human beings with affinity towards each other. Each one is subject to a different plight. The righteous is our brother and the sinner is our brother. Therefore, why not help the one at fault and lead him to the right path? We should forgive the sinner so he understands that we are here to rescue him till he is on the right track and not desert him. Any person who was rescued by another will never forget that. When he does, his friend shall remind him, "Did you forget that person who has helped you out at the time when you were in distress?" This will bring him back to his sanity and forever. End of quote of Sheikh Zayed. The words of the founder of the UAE reveal the aspect of tolerance, forgiveness, and acceptance of the other. Tolerance, in a certain sense, can be said to be a forerunner of fraternity, which means all of mankind adopting a worldview of brotherhood and sisterhood with a responsibility towards the other. Pope Francis has repeatedly reminded the world that today a third world war is fought piecemeal in several places. Therefore, it is a permanent priority of the agenda of Pope Francis to advance the cause of peace and respectful coexistence. The road towards the drafting and signing of the document on human fraternity had a specific and urgent purpose: the adoption of human fraternity as a new pathway by which all of us, men and women of goodwill, would promise to work together so that mankind may enjoy that universal peace which all of us hope to enjoy in this life and are called to bequeath to future generations. During his speech following the signing of the document, Pope Francis pointed out the urgency of mankind to enter together into the ark of fraternity to preserve the future of the world. He also pointed out the two wings of the dove of peace, which was also the emblem of his visit to the UAE, the wings of education and justice, which would serve as the wings of fraternity. On the second anniversary of signing the document early this year, Pope Francis said, "Either we are brothers and sisters or we are enemies. This is not a time for indifference." Let us now explore some of the ways in which human fraternity can be concretely promoted in multinational societies. Human fraternity is the common ground that people of different faiths and nationalities can live together in peace and mutual respect. The concept stems from the belief that all human beings have their origin in the Father of the universe, and thus are brothers and sisters to one another. Human fraternity thus makes it possible that every human being is seen as belonging to the one human family and can feel at home no matter wherever he lives. Cordial relations between Christians and Muslims on the level of religion go back in this country to the 1950s, when Their Highnesses Sheikh Shakbut bin Sultan Al Nahyan and his brother Sheikh Zayed bin Sultan Al Nahyan adopted an open and tolerant policy towards the immigrants who came here to work. The Catholics were among the first to be given land for a house of worship in the UAE on 22nd June 1963. Both the rulers were present for the opening of the first St. Joseph's Church at the Corniche in Abu Dhabi on 25th February 1965. And in the Emirates of Dubai, through a similar generosity of His Highness Sheikh Rashid bin Zayed Al Maktoum, the foundation stone for a new place of worship was laid on 25th May 1966. Sheikh Rashid visited the new church, which was inaugurated on the 7th April in 1967. These outstanding gestures of openness and welcome laid the foundation for the tolerant relationships between the religions within the United Arab Emirates. I am living since more than 17 years in the UAE, and I've seen and experienced the positive fruits of a policy based on tolerance and respect. And the document of human fraternity demands that we in the present generation do our part to ensure that the positive steps taken by the generation that has passed is not only safeguarded, but also taken forward. Further steps have already been taken since the 4th February 2019, like the Zayed Award for Human Fraternity, instituted by the Higher Committee of Human Fraternity to acknowledge those who concretely live the ideal of human fraternity, and the establishment of the UN Day of Human Fraternity on 4th February, the anniversary of the signing of the document, for which the UAE played a major role. Of particular interest to us in the context of this forum, which seeks to develop the concept of positive global citizenship, is the area of dialogue. And here I would like to quote the document: "Dialogue, understanding, and the widespread promotion of a culture of tolerance, acceptance of others, and of living together peacefully, which would contribute significantly to reducing many economic, social, political, and environmental problems that weigh so heavily on a large part of humanity." End of quote. I was a young man at the age of 21 years when Pope John XXIII, who was Pope of the Catholic Church from 1958 to 63, published his encyclical letter Pacem in Terris, Peace on Earth. The Pope left this letter as spiritual heritage and testament not only to the Church, but also to the whole world. Known as the Good Pope, he died less than 2 months later. And it was the first letter of a Pope addressed to all men and women of goodwill, and is a kind of Magna Carta for the fundamental rights of every human being. A few months before drafting this encyclical letter, the Cuban Missile Crisis in October '62 had threatened to escalate to a nuclear world war. I think nobody here may remember that, but I lived those days full of tension where we didn't know if tomorrow a third world war would break out. And this encyclical letter was written by Pope John XXIII under the realization of the shock that humanity had the potential to destroy itself in the absence of a conversion to a true and honest spirit and action of peacemaking. This letter deals with the order that should govern relationships among people, with governing authorities, among states, and with world communities. I would like to draw your attention to the key principle laid down by the document as a basis for the different types of relationships. The document begins by asking readers to acknowledge that every human being is truly a person. Recognizing the personhood of every human being means to acknowledge that the other is endowed with intelligence and a free will, and thus has rights and duties. The document then lays down some of the rights of the person: the right to live and have a decent livelihood, and the right to receive food, clothing, medical care, shelter, rest, and the necessary social services. If through no fault of his own, he or she is deprived of livelihood, he or she also has the right to be looked after. After speaking about the most basic human rights, which we have just heard, the document then elaborates further on the rights pertaining to moral and cultural values, such as the right to good name, the right to freedom to investigate the truth, and the freedom to pursue whatever profession he or she may choose. He or she also has the right to enjoy the benefits of culture and good education. Recognizing the rights of the person is a precondition to peace. History points out numerous instances that a society which neglects the fundamental truth of the personhood of all human beings cannot exist in peace. And the basic doctrine was further developed by the Catholic Church with the documents of the Second Vatican Council, such as the document about religious freedom and the document about the relationships with the non-Christian religions. Acknowledging the spiritual and religious dimension of the human person, these documents lay down that the relationships among human beings who may differ according to their religious beliefs are always to be characterized by respect and esteem of the human person in all cases. Almost 60 years ago, Pope John XXIII, I already spoke about him, wrote, "Among man's rights is that of being able to worship God in accordance with the right dictates of his own conscience and to profess his religion both in private and in public." The document of human fraternity signed by Pope Francis and Sheikh Ahmed Al-Tayeb builds on the same principle. I quote, "Freedom is a right of every person. Each individual enjoys the freedom of belief, thought, expression, and action. The pluralism and the diversity of religions, color, sex, race, and language are willed by God in His wisdom, through which He created human beings. This divine wisdom is the source from which the right to freedom of belief and the freedom to be different derives." End of quote. Thus we see that the acknowledgement of the basic right of the freedom of the human person is thus an important component in promoting human fraternity in a multinational society. Cardinal Ayuso, the head of the Pontifical Council of Interreligious Dialogue, on the occasion of the visit of Pope Francis to Iraq in last March, said, "At the root of the idea of human fraternity and interreligious dialogue is the belief that God is the creator of everything and everyone, and so we are members of one family, and we must recognize that. Recognizing all people as children of one God," the Cardinal said, "moves relationships beyond mere tolerance to fraternal coexistence, recognizing the diversity that exists among us, neutralizing violence, and living as brothers and sisters. Furthermore," he said, "it calls on members of different religions and especially religious leaders to cooperate and collaborate to ensure that everyone enjoys equal rights everywhere. We are all members of the one human family, and as such we have equal rights and responsibilities as citizens of the world." Now, let me pass on to an aspect which in some way may touch us all during the peculiar time that we are living in and have hopefully passed through, from which I wish to draw some lessons: the practice of worship during the pandemic. Passing through the harsh realities brought about by the pandemic has been a rather painful experience for all of us. At the same time, I do not wish to hide the fact that sometimes I wonder whether we have allowed the restriction of the pandemic to put a brake to the fruitful reception of the document and to slow down its application. Quite understandably, those responsible for public safety were under tremendous pressure to rein in the devastating effects of the pandemic and to keep the virus at bay. For almost a year, services of all religions were almost fully suspended. In many countries, some of the rather extreme measures were taken with little consultation with religious leaders and had sometimes the effect of suffocating religious practice. Needless to say that this has had painful consequences for the individual believers and their respective faith communities, irrespective of their religion. 2019 was declared in the UAE the Year of Tolerance and was promoted by the leadership of the country. I am living and working as a Catholic bishop in this region, as I mentioned already, since 2004, and experienced the growing tolerance and freedom of religions. We enjoyed the fact that, respecting the laws and basic rules of the country, we could practice our religion freely within the compounds given us for these purposes. The emergency measures taken since the outbreak of the pandemic in order to protect us from the spread of the deadly virus were welcome and well accepted. However, the longer they lasted and the stronger the controls became, the less they were understood, as they were partly affecting the substance of our religious practices. While adhering to the demands of safety cannot be ignored, at the same time, the path laid out by the document on human fraternity calls us to a keen vigilance in preserving the spirit of openness, respect, and dialogue at all levels with respect to the religious needs of the human person. The above aspect, which I dwelt upon rather briefly, touches upon the topic of this summit, that means positive citizenship. The inhabitants of this country are expected rightly to contribute to the building of the nation, be they citizens or not. The freedom to practice one's own religion together with one's fellow faithful is an important factor which supports the faithful performance on one's duty. This is to be carried out with respect not only for all the basic laws of the country in which we live, but equally under respect of the basic rules and obligations of one's religion, in my case of the worldwide Catholic Church. I like to close with a word on preserving the legacy of tolerance. I noticed during the last 18 years that the members of my congregation, I'm speaking about the Catholic Church, enjoyed and appreciated the growing tolerance which is a legacy of the founder of the nation 50 years ago, Sheikh Zayed bin Sultan Al Nahyan. Consequently, though not being citizens, people enjoyed not only to work here, but also to identify with the UAE, their host country, and to contribute to its growth. Further studies and meetings are needed for us to build up the rich legacy handed down by the great men who showed us shining examples of tolerance and what it means to be a positive citizen of a global community who respects the rights of the other and fulfills his or her duties with sincerity. As the nation passes through the year of the 50th anniversary, I thank the organizers of the Aqdar World Summit who strived to capture and transmit this rich legacy to the coming generation. The UAE has been built upon a solid cornerstone of fraternity, tolerance, and peaceful coexistence. In consequence, I leave the final word to Sheikh Zayed, who said, I quote, "Future generations will be living in a world that is very different from that to which we are accustomed. It is essential that we prepare ourselves and our children for that new world." End of quote. And may God bless all of you, and may God bless the UAE. Thank you.